Another episode of the I Ching Oracle, the Cosmic Way. And right here we're on Hexagram 10, Conducting Oneself, which is heaven over lake. Heaven over the lake. The judgment. If the person treads upon the tail of the tiger, it bites him. Here, the sage describes how certain hidden helpers a person is born with cooperate to enable him to conduct himself in harmony with the cosmic whole. These helpers are concealed senses for which the tiger is a metaphor. They are not the commonly known five senses, but are, for example, a person's sense of appropriateness, the sense of loyalty to his inner truth, the sense of fairness, and the sense of wholeness. These senses are referred to throughout this book as the metaphorical senses. One of their general characteristics is simplicity, as mentioned in line 1. They allow a person to respond harmoniously and appropriately to circumstances without the necessity of thinking. They operate as involuntary responses that keep him centered and complete within himself, therefore in harmony with the cosmos. When a person lives his life in harmony with all his senses, he remains without blame, meaning he does not create a fate. The metaphorical senses mentioned here are perceptible by the conscious mind only if a person tunes into them. However, when the conscious mind comes under the domination of the ego, thinking becomes exalted, and these senses, as a feeling consciousness, are subsequently diminished as primitive, repressed into the subconscious and disregarded. Because they continue to act on their own subliminally on behalf of the whole, they have been assumed to be of a purely mechanical nature, as the name involuntary nervous system suggests. Their cooperation with the conscious mind can succeed, however, only when the person validates their importance. The senses mentioned are located in muscle tissues throughout the body. They bring about involuntary responses such as blushing, retreating, fleeing, and also advancing along the line of no resistance. The latter is another term for saying they achieve things through transformation, no resistance. One of the functions of a person's metaphorical senses is to protect him from harm coming from outside that threatens his completeness. In short, they enable him to do the right thing in relation to the circumstance of the moment. Treading on the tail of the tiger is a metaphor for what happens when a person acts against these senses because they have become suppressed through conditioning. Then the tiger bites in the form of a fate. The suppression of a person's metaphorical senses starts at a very young age when a program is introjected into the child's psyche that demonizes his animal nature as dirty and undesirable. The goal of this program is to have the child regard every fluid and material that naturally comes out of his body as despicable, and every exploration into his sexuality accompanied by guilt. Since his animal nature and sexuality are the very sources of his life force, chi energy, these mistaken ideas trap the person in an impossible paradox. He must regard the very things that comprise his nature and supply him with nourishment as his enemy. A further program is installed by the collective ego, which tells the child that he can redeem himself by developing his higher nature through following the dictates of the collective ego. However, his rejecting the body as inferior puts spells and poison arrows on his body, creating illnesses and other forms of fate. A person receives this hexagram when he is experiencing a fate due to the above false program that has disabled his metaphorical senses. The sage draws our attention to the difference between self-development, defined by the collective ego, and the natural desire to free the true self from the ego. The collective ego first cultivates a sense of insufficiency and guilt in the individual in order to create a false dependency on it. In slandering a person's animal nature as wild, it provides a reason for its hierarchical control over him. By accepting these slanders, the person incurs cosmic blame. When the blame is continued over a period of time, a fate is activated to make him aware that he is in conflict with his true nature. To free the true self, the sage encourages him to rid himself of the idea of guilt and then of the entire program of cultivating his higher nature, which is based on guilt and the idea of insufficiency of self. Part of the collective ego's program is the development of so-called qualities of character and models of conduct that would make him a superior man. Implied in this program is the self-flattering idea that by becoming guilt-free, the person can become like God. This hexagram makes a clear distinction between conduct that leads to the fulfillment of a person's destiny and conduct that creates a fate. Fate is not, as the collective ego would make us believe, something we are born with, that is written in the stars, or is the result of a hostile cosmos or nature. It is rather the consequence of conduct resulting from mistaken ideas and beliefs. Fate is a signal that the person is diverted by these beliefs from fulfilling his cosmic destiny. Spells and poison arrows connected with this hexagram contain phrases such as, "Human's animal nature is the source of evil. In and of yourself, you are not enough to cope with life," and ideas that a person is guilty by nature. Related phrases are, "You have to develop character, you have to become something, and you need to become like God." Related spells come from calling things by wrong names that create confusion about their true natures. Among them are calling the ego the self, and which many of us have fallen prey to, and inventing things that do not exist in the cosmic order of things, such as soul, whoa, for the psyche, instincts for the metaphorical senses, and culprit for a person who is trapped in mistaken beliefs. So you're telling me that the soul is kind of an incorrect name, an incorrect term. And the book gets into this at length a bit later. I guess I'll just go ahead and say a few things about it. So the reason that the word soul is kind of incorrect to use is because it implies that your true existence lies outside of your body, basically. And we know, like, when you do that, that is dividing, that's a form of dividing yourself into parts, in a way slandering your original wholeness, the wholeness which you do possess at all times. Um, because that word soul, the soul of something is outside your body. It's not really in your body. It's somewhere else. Um, the word psyche is seems to be a better description for what we're actually talking about then. Line 1, simple conduct, progress without blame. Simple conduct means responding to situations rather than creating them. It is a way of remaining centered and correct in the midst of other people's activity. Making progress without blame occurs when a person is free of pretenses. This line often refers to conduct that is not in harmony with the cosmos because it lacks simplicity. Such an attitude may be observed in the person who comes to the I Ching only to get free of the discomfort caused by his problems, and not to rid himself of the luxurious and egocentric attitudes that have caused them. Such a person will not escape his fate. The line may also refer to a person who does what is correct from a cosmic point of view, but only to be a superior person, and not because it is in harmony with his true feelings. The same also applies to the person who fails to retreat and say the inner no in the face of others' ego behavior, from fear of being disliked. Simple conduct means to do a thing for its own sake, as in the famous Chinese saying, "The master potter leaves no trace." He makes the pot for itself and not to achieve acclaim or from any other intention. The line can also refer to someone who has adopted the self-image of the unpretentious person. However, simplicity, like modesty, cannot be achieved as a goal, since it is the consequence of a person seeing his true place in the cosmos. When such a person creates a fate through having adopted the self-image of being simple, he will say, "I don't deserve this fate." Line 2, treading a smooth, level course, the quiet and solitary man fulfills his destiny. The quiet and solitary man indicates a person who is capable of shutting out the clamoring voices of the ego and thus is attentive to all that his senses tell him. Having no need to put himself forward egotistically, he is able to go on his way alone and retreat in the presence of others' ego behavior. He does not judge or condemn them, but withdraws to maintain his integrity. Treading a smooth, level course refers to his being centered and therefore not having to go through the ups and downs of fate. The path that such a person follows is primarily one of responses rather than ego-led reactions. He thus embraces what is harmonious by saying an inner yes, and rejects disharmony by saying an inner no and withdrawing from participation in it. In all situations, he consults his feelings for what feels harmonious and acts accordingly. A person may receive this line when he is afraid to stand or go on his way alone in this fashion, out of fear of being lonely or excluded by others. He does not realize that retreating from ego behavior in others is to be embraced by the cosmos itself. His fear keeps him imprisoned and makes him accept ego behavior from others. It also draws others' transgressions into his space Although he does not realize it, he can always leave the prison of his fear. Such a person may be caught in the idea that to be without someone is to be only half a person, and that he needs the other to complete him. This view puts a poison arrow on his natural completeness. To become free of it, he needs to rid himself of the phrases, for example, in and of yourself you're not enough, or by yourself you are incomplete. This line may also be referring to a person who is staying in a wrong relationship from guilt, believing that he owes it to the partner to stay. To be free of the spells created by guilt, he needs to reject guilt and all its supporting reasons. Accepting a wrong relationship with another creates cosmic blame. This line informs us that the purpose of maintaining inner quiet is to attain clarity, not to be quiet or live in solitude, because doing so fulfills a model of spirituality. A spiritual self-image is still a creation of the ego. This line also exposes the mistaken idea promoted by the collective ego that spiritual growth needs to take place in solitude. Such an idea comes from spiritual ambition, which occurs when the ego in a person tries to take charge of his inner growth toward maturity by turning it into a retreat from the world. It seeks to attain an ideal perfection through a solitude that will keep him free of worldly contamination. Such a person confounds isolation from others with the inner independence that is found through depending on the cosmos. Line 3, a one-eyed man is able to see. A lame man is able to tread. He treads on the tail of the tiger. The tiger bites the man, misfortune. The one-eyed man and lame man is a metaphor for a person whose senses have been partially disabled due to a poison arrow. The line states that although he is somewhat able to see and conduct his life, he is not in harmony with the cosmos. As a consequence, he continually creates fates for himself. The poison arrow, which was put upon him in a very early age by one or more of his elders, has at its base the idea that human's animal nature is the source of evil. There we go again. And that therefore he is born guilty. The person who has this belief is unable to see, is one-eyed, that every aspect of nature, including his animal nature, is an expression of the cosmic consciousness and is therefore endowed with dignity. The one-eyed man can also refer to a person who, in judging another, is judging his nature as faulty. The sage informs us that a person's nature is not evil, but that evil comes from his acting upon mistaken beliefs that put humans at the center of the universe. It may also be that he is judging the person on the basis of appearances rather than on the inner truth of the situation, which he cannot see, another meaning of one-eyed. It is possible that the person's behavior is being caused by projection spells or poison arrows, which may have been put on him by the seemingly innocent parties to the situation. By looking to the wrong parties and blaming him, he has separated from the cosmic unity and may have created a fate for himself. To correct himself, he needs to say the inner no to the idea that evil lies in a person's or a thing's nature. He can then ask for help to have his fate extinguished. A person may receive this line when he has attached himself to his past mistakes, curbing his ability to go on with life. This happens when he allows his natural feeling of regret to be transferred, as the collective ego teaches him to do, into a permanent state of guilt, an emotion that gives the collective ego control over him. Such self-incrimination puts a spell on him. This line can also refer to a person who carelessly treads on aspects of nature through regarding them as inert, mechanical, chemical, or alchemical. Because he thinks he can do with them what he likes, he creates a fate and thus is bitten. A person may also receive this line when he has carelessly ignored the cosmic law by adopting a high and mighty attitude. He arrogantly upholds conduct that is human-centered, believing that because he is a human being, he has rights over animals, other people, or even life itself. When fate has bitten as a consequence, he thinks he is innocent and blames it on a hostile universe. His attitude is the source of his fate. It's all about the attitude. It's all about your attitude. To end it, he needs to return to humility by taking his proper place in the cosmos as an equal to all its other aspects. The tiger bites the man in all these cases is a metaphor for the fate that bites a person as a result of his disregard of his metaphorical senses. It is these very senses that bite him, to wake him up to the fact that due to their disablement, his reactions to danger, which are coming from the ego, are making him vulnerable to attacks from without. These attacks come from both the collective ego and the egos in others in the form of mistaken ideas that would further harm him if he follows them. This disablement makes them unable to recognize their damaging effects and also unable to attract the protection of the helpers. People experience this wake-up call in disturbing dreams and in small accidents. If these warnings are not heeded, the adversities will become ever more severe. Line 4, he treads on the tail of the tiger. Caution and circumspection lead ultimately to good fortune. He treads on the tail of the tiger is a metaphor for a person who is experiencing a fate. Fate, as indicated in the previous line, can be ended at any time a person recognizes the error of his ideas and beliefs and rids himself of them. Caution and circumspection is a warning that there are mistaken ideas present in the situation that will pull the person back into certain traps. It warns in particular against the dangers created by incipient guilt. Guilt is that ego emotion cultivated in a person to lock him securely within the collective ego's values. It is the feeling that sometimes sets in after a person has said the necessary inner no to wrong actions or beliefs he has been trained to tolerate and accept. It makes him doubt the correctness of his authorizing himself to say no to the ego. To have feelings of guilt is also the result of training that causes the individual to transfer his natural feelings of regret for having made a mistake into the state of permanent guilt. This transfer succeeds in reinstalling the spell that keeps him within the confines of the collective ego. On this account, guilt in any form needs to be recognized as the first thing that needs to be said no to. It is the element that undoes the effect of previously said inner no's and supplies the rationales that reinstall all the old ego programs. Caution and circumspection are those metaphorical senses that lead a person to the kind of detachment that separates him from the ego by making him an observer of his emotions, freeing him from being trapped in them. Detachment is a neutral attitude that is free of being in any gear, such as reverse, which is the impulse to deny, avoid, or flee, or first gear, an impulse to move forward before one knows where one is going, or in drive mode, an aggressive or defensive movement. Neutrality creates the inner space that allows the sage to be heard within, for it is the sage, ultimately, that can help the person free himself from his fate, the good fortune referred to. Caution and circumspection also warn a person against the danger of blaming his fate on something outside himself, such as chance circumstances, God, or the cosmos. It also warns him against attempting to make bargains with the entity he blames, as by making pacts with God, or reparations to the cosmos, as by doing good deeds, or by making efforts to change his circumstances, thinking that his fate is merely a mechanical incident. While fate can be ended through relating to it correctly, it cannot be ended through bargaining or by efforts to change it. This line can also refer to a person whose fate has been caused by going against his natural inhibitions from a false sense of duty. His natural inhibitions are metaphorical senses whose function is to protect him from doing things that cause a loss of self-esteem and dignity. Going against them leads to inner conflict, which is felt as embarrassment and self-betrayal. The person can avoid self-betrayal if he is cautious and retreats when confronted with situations that arouse hesitation about entering them. Circumspection, in this regard, refers to taking seriously the warnings offered by his feelings. It also refers to finding a tactful way to handle situations in which others assert that it is his duty to do things that are against his nature. Don't do those things. Caution and circumspection also refer to not accepting something as true simply because someone has said it is so. The validity of ideas and statements can always be checked with the sage by using the RTCM, and if necessary, by asking for a hexagram. In this way, a person can avoid putting himself on paths that are dead-ended or that would invoke a fate. So, literally, this is saying anything anyone says, any idea that's out there, you can literally ask the sage, ask the I Ching about the truth of what that statement is. That's incredible. Like, do you know, like, if this were common knowledge, what that would mean for the world? That you can simply ask the I Ching about what someone says is true or not? That's incredible. Wow. Wow, that's world changing right there. It's just incredible. A person may also receive this line when he has wrongly concluded that he can do nothing about his fate. As said above, all fate can be ended, but in this case, the person first needs to say the inner no to the idea that he can do nothing about it. The purpose of fate is to redirect him inwardly to freeing himself from the mistaken ideas that prevent him from fulfilling his destiny. And remember, everyone has a cosmic purpose, a cosmic destiny, which comes down to basically fulfilling your uniqueness, being yourself. It's amazing. Line 5, resolute conduct. It furthers to be firmly correct with awareness of danger. In its cosmic sense, resolute conduct means putting one's will to the correct use. What is called will is not the same as the will to live. Our will is part of our metaphorical senses, but unlike some of the other metaphorical senses, it can be flattered by the ego into serving its purposes, as in fighting what the ego defines as evil, or in pushing the person's efforts to achieve goals it defines as good. The ego's flattery is the danger referred to in this line. Being firmly correct means saying the inner no to those flatteries. When a person is struggling to free himself from the ego's tyranny, his will can be of inestimable help if he asks it to come to his aid. When the ego has succeeded in turning a person's will to its purposes, it uses the will to obstruct the other metaphorical senses that would otherwise be able to restrain the person from pursuing its false goals. In the will's unrestrained effort to achieve the ego's goals, the entire self will be sacrificed if need be. As the driver of a person's will, the ego strongly asserts itself as I. The person needs to recognize that the parasitic ego, if not stopped, will drive him so hard it will extinguish its host. Whoa. It can be stopped by saying the inner no to the ego's demands. Absolutely. The ego will also use a person's will either to fight a fate or to overcome it through submission. Both approaches come from a heroic self-image that misuses the will. Such an abusive will only creates a new fate. The person needs to rid himself of the mistaken ideas that create such self-images. The mention of danger in this line can also refer to being rigidly correct. The true self does not strive after any such self-flattering idea of perfection. Rigid correctness is also associated with self-righteousness, which comes from the ambition to be in the right and to fulfill the self-image of the good person, as defined by the rules and values of the collective ego. Wherever either ambition or self-image is involved, a fate is created. Our will, as line 5 of hexagram 31 informs us, is located in the nerves in the back of the neck, just below the brainstem. From this position, it is capable of influencing the other metaphorical senses located in muscle tissues throughout the body. That's the will. Somewhere on there. Look to your conduct and weigh the favorable signs. When everything is fulfilled, supreme good fortune comes. A person can receive this line when he is weighing whether to make a particular move. The line tells him that his hesitation is justified because his common sense feels elements in the situation that are not appropriate, but are not yet conscious to his mind. He needs to consult the sage to discover the inner truth of the situation. Then the right way to go will show itself. This line can also indicate a person who is not going on with his life because he is waiting for something favorable to happen. As hexagram 35 progressing makes us aware, life is a process of going on. It is while we are going on with our lives that the things happen that lead us to our destiny, even though at the time we may not recognize this fact. The word weighing also points to the person who believes he can make deals with fate, that he will be rewarded if he behaves according to the shoulds and musts of the collective ego. The person who has thus lived his life by the book has ended in finding only disappointment. A person can also receive this line when he has misunderstood the true meaning of conduct. Since early childhood, he may have lived his life by the standards and values of the collective ego, and may even think he has brought these values to perfection through fulfilling its images of the hero, the good person, or the spiritual person. He may have transferred this idea of correct conduct to his way of following the I Ching as a sacred text, with the idea that if he behaves as he understands it, an imagined good fortune will come. He has taken the written words as a promise. Now he is weighing the outcome and is wondering why the good fortune has not come. He has been paying attention to conduct as form, rather than understanding that correct conduct is the result of being in harmony with his inner truth. He has not noticed that in doing so, his true nature has been sacrificed, and he has created a fate. He can free himself from his fate by recognizing his mistaken beliefs and ridding himself of his self images. All right, guys. Thank you very much. Make sure and like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys for the next one.